Welcome, everyone. Let's actually ask you to do something right out of the gate today.
Yeah, a little thought experiment.
Right. Think about the last time you had your picture taken.
Hmm.
Maybe it was, a quick selfie or a group shot at a party, or even one of those stiff professional headshots for work. What did you do the very second you saw that camera point your way?
You straightened up.
Exactly. You probably straightened your posture, adjusted your expression, and put on your camera face. All right.
We all do it.
We really do. We all wear a mask to present our best, most controlled selves to the world. But today, we are taking a deep dive into the life and work of a man who made it his absolute life's mission to tear that mask completely off.
He really did. We're looking at a master who had, well, zero interest in capturing what a person simply looked like. He was completely obsessed with capturing who they actually were the moment that performance stopped.
And we have a truly phenomenal source today to guide us through this. It's a comprehensive translated article from a virtual exhibition platform, and it's titled Richard Avedon, the master who discovered the psychological depth of portrait photography.
It's a fantastic piece.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore exactly how Avedon stripped away the glossy artifice of the fashion world and those heavily guarded walls of celebrity culture to reveal the raw, often uncomfortable psychological truth of the human face.
It's a stunning journey.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Where does a revolutionary eye like that even come from? Because looking at the source notes here, I was actually shocked to find out his signature style didn't originate in some elite Parisian art school.
Not at all. It starts in a place that makes a lot of sense when you look at the trajectory of his later work, but it's incredibly grounded. Richard Avedon was born in New York in 1923.
Okay.
And he grew up in a Russian Jewish immigrant family, and they ran a clothing store right there in Manhattan.
Which is such a great detail from the article. I mean, you think about a young kid surrounded by mannequins, fabrics, window displays. The source material highlights this as an early, crucial exposure to the visual language of fashion.
Absolutely.
The seeds of his aesthetic were planted right there in the family shop. But he didn't just walk straight from the family store into high fashion. There was a major unexpected detour that the article points out, and frankly, it sounds like the furthest thing from high art.
It does, yeah.
Right.
And yet that detour is arguably the most important training ground of his entire life.
Mm-hmm.
In 1942, right during World War II, Avedon joins the U.S. Navy.
Right.
But he isn't sent to the front lines in a traditional combat role. Instead, his job is to take military ID photos for the Merchant Marines.
Which sounds incredibly mundane, right? Taking ID photos for sailors day in and day out.
Completely mundane. It wasn't art. It was pure bureaucratic repetition. He took thousands upon thousands of these standard, straight-on portraits. But this is exactly why it matters so much. Avedon himself treated this endless parade of faces as a laboratory. It was his laboratory for understanding the subtle psychology of the human face, specifically this concept of facial fatigue.
Wait, facial fatigue, how does that play into taking a simple ID photo?
Well, think about it. When you sit for an official photo, you try to hold a neutral, acceptable expression.
Sure.
But when you are photographing thousands of guys, the process is mechanical. You tell them to sit, look straight, don't move. Eventually, the muscles in the face literally get tired of holding that social mask.
Wow.
The guard drops. And when you strip away the background, the styling, the context, and you just look at face after face, you start to notice the tiny micro-expressions that emerge when that fatigue sets in.
So the real person slips out.
Exactly. That's when you see the anxiety, the bravado, the fear, the real person underneath the uniform.
That repetitive, mechanical process trained his eye to see what others missed. So when the war ends, he brings this incredibly sharp, trained eye back to New York. He decides to pursue photography professionally, teams up with the legendary art director Alexei Brodovich, and by the late 1940s and into the 1950s, Avedon is shooting for Harper's Bazaar.
Yes.
And according to the source, this is where he turns an entire industry upside down.
He fundamentally changed the medium. To appreciate what Avedon accomplished, you have to understand what fashion photography looked like before him.
Right. Paint that picture for us.
It was incredibly static. Models were basically treated like flesh and blood mannequins. They stood perfectly still in highly controlled, lifeless studio environments under heavy, hot lighting. The clothes were the only things that mattered, and the models were just hangers.
Okay, but I'm reading how he changed it. And wait, so he just took them out of the studio and made them walk around?
Basically, yes.
It sounds so obvious to us now. Was that really enough to turn the whole industry upside down?
It sounds simple today, but in the 1940s, it was practically heresy. You have to remember the technical limitations of the time. Cameras were bulky, film speeds were slow, and you needed massive lights.
Ah, right.
Going outside meant dealing with unpredictable elements. But Avedon said, no, this needs life. He takes the models out of the rigid studios and throws them into the real world. He makes them walk, laugh, leap, and dance through the streets of Paris. He added kinetic energy to an industry that was standing still.
He transformed fashion photography from a simple catalog display into narrative storytelling. He made it cinematic.
Highly cinematic.
And nothing captures that cinematic theatricality better than one of the most famous photographs in history, his 1955 masterpiece, Dovima with elephants.
Oh, an absolute classic.
The article sets the scene beautifully. Imagine stepping into the interior of the Cirque d'Hiver in Paris. The lighting is dramatic, almost moody. In the center of the frame is the famous model, Dovima. She is wearing an unbelievably elegant, sweeping Christian Dior haute couture dress.
She looks like a fragile, exquisite sculpture.
Yes. And right beside her, framing her on either side, are two massive, rough, chained elephants.
The visual there is just staggering. The source notes the brilliant, striking contrast Avedon achieves. You have the absolute pinnacle of human luxury, extreme elegance, and physical fragility juxtaposed directly against the raw, primitive, heavy power of these giant animals.
And the way she is posed, reaching out to the elephants, the chains, creating these sweeping lines, it's like a ballet. Avedon managed to create this theatrical rhythm that elevated a simple dress advertisement into high art. It's breathtaking.
Truly.
But as much as he revolutionized fashion, the source makes a compelling argument that his true legacy, the thing that cemented him as a master, is what he did when he turned his lens away from the clothes and focused entirely on portraits.
That's right. When we talk about his celebrity portraits, we are talking about a total demystification of fame. He took the polished icons of the 20th century and aggressively dismantled their public personas.
He developed a very specific signature style to achieve this. If you are familiar with an Avedon portrait, you immediately know it. The stark, pure white background, the incredibly sharp, unforgiving lighting, and the subject looking directly, intensely into the lens.
It's iconic.
But technically speaking, how did he get that white background to look so infinitely deep and blank? It doesn't look like a normal wall.
That's a great technical question. What's fascinating here is how he manipulated light to create a psychological void. He would take a seamless roll of white paper and blast it with high-intensity strobe lights, essentially overexposing the background so it blows out completely white on the film.
Oh, so it just erases everything behind it.
It eliminates all shadows. By completely removing the background, Avedon strips away all context.
Right.
There's no fancy living room, no beautiful landscape to anchor the person in reality.
Right.
It forces the viewer into a direct, unavoidable psychological confrontation with the subject. You have nowhere else to look but at their face and their body language. They've absolutely nowhere to hide.
Which brings us to 1957, New York City, and the most famous woman in the world, Marilyn Monroe.
This photo is legendary for a reason.
It really is, and the article details the setup brilliantly. Marilyn comes into Avedon's studio. For hours, she is giving him exactly what the world expects.
The full performance.
She is dancing, she is flashing that brilliant million-watt smile, she is giving a high-energy, flawless Hollywood performance for the camera.
She is playing the character of Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah.
The sex symbol, the effervescent star.
Exactly. But then the shoot ends, the music stops, the performance is over, and Avedon, who has essentially been waiting for this exact second of facial fatigue we talked about earlier, doesn't put his camera down.
He takes one last frame.
He takes one last frame. Look closely at this frame. The glamorous smile completely vanishes. Her shoulders drop. She looks down and away from the lens. Her face is suddenly heavy with this profound exhaustion and an overwhelming melancholy.
It is the ultimate demystification of the star. Avedon captured the profound loneliness and the deep vulnerability that lived right behind her public persona. He showed the world the human being who was tired of holding up the weight of the icon.
It's a heartbreaking image because it feels so startlingly real, and Avedon had this uncanny ability to pull that hidden reality out of everyone he shot. Take his 1952 portrait of Charlie Chaplin in New York. The article frames this as another brilliant example of breaking the public mold.
It is, because it completely subverts your expectations.
Right. When you think of Charlie Chaplin, you think of the tramp, the lovable, naive, sweet little guy with the cane and the bowler hat. But in this photograph, Chaplin has completely stepped away from that lovable persona.
He really has.
He is looking directly at the camera, and he has his fingers up on either side of his head, making devil horns. And his smile isn't sweet, it's dark, mocking, and intensely defiant.
To understand the weight of that portrait, we have to look at the history the source provides. In 1952, Chaplin was under intense political pressure in America. The McCarthy era was in full swing, the Red Scare was dominating headlines, and Chaplin's left-leaning political views were making him a target for the government.
Wow.
In fact, he would soon leave the United States entirely over this. Now, the source dives into his controversial politics here, and just as a quick aside, we're just looking at the history the article lays out, not endorsing any of it, but that intense political friction is exactly what you see written all over his face in this portrait.
He wasn't the sweet little tramp at that moment. He was a man cornered, and Avedon caught him fighting back with dark, defiant humor. It captures the incredible friction between his beloved public image and his complex, embattled reality.
Absolutely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. As we move out of the 50s and into the late 60s, the culture shifts radically. The polished veneer of the post-war era fractures, and Avedon's camera is right there, capturing the literal and figurative scars of the era.
The 1960s were a time of massive upheaval, assassinations, and cultural revolution, and Avedon's portraits from this era refused to shy away from the trauma and the noise of the decade.
Let's look at his 1969 portrait of Andy Warhol in New York. You hear Andy Warhol, and you instantly think of bright soup cans, Marilyn Monroe screen prints, and the cool, detached king of pop art. The guy who hid behind sunglasses and a silver wig.
Right, the untouchable figure.
But Avedon gives us an incredibly visceral, shocking image. Warhol is standing in front of that stark white background, and his leather jacket and shirt are open. He is boldly, almost clinically, displaying his torso, which is covered in deep, jagged, horrific surgical scars.
The backstory here is chilling. In 1968, Warhol was shot and nearly killed by a radical writer named Valerie Solanas at his studio, The Factory. He barely survived, his organs were severely damaged, and he required extensive life-saving surgery.
And the photo doesn't hide any of that.
What Avedon does here is radical. He refuses to hide the trauma. By placing those scars front and center against that clean white void, he takes the ultimate, untouchable pop icon, a man who worships superficial surfaces, and reveals him as a fragile, mortal, human body that has been permanently marked by violence and history. It's total refusal to sanitize reality.
And Avedon was fearless about exploring the darker, more complicated sides of his subjects. The source highlights two incredibly stark literary portraits that perfectly illustrate this psychological depth. First, there's the 1958 portrait of the poet Ezra Pound, taken in Terrace.
This is perhaps one of Avedon's most uncomfortable images to look at. It is intensely disturbing.
Pound is photographed physically squeezing his own throat, with his eyes wide and a look of near madness on his face. Now, the source notes Pound's highly controversial history. He had made fascist, anti-Semitic propaganda broadcasts in Italy during World War II, was charged with treason by the U.S., and spent years in a psychiatric institution.
A very heavy history.
Very heavy. And again, we are strictly conveying the facts from our source material here without taking any political stance. But the photo is undeniably charged with that dark history. It feels like you are looking at a man literally wrestling with his own demons, choking on his own legacy.
It's a portrait of psychological suffocation. And then, for a completely different kind of psychological portrait, the article contrasts that with the famously sharp-witted writer Dorothy Parker, photographed in New York in 1957.
This one is so quiet compared to Pound. Parker is lying on a couch, completely relaxed, but her eyes are closed.
Which breaks a cardinal rule of portrait photography. You almost always want eye contact to engage the viewer. But Avedon knew exactly what he was doing. By having her eyes closed, she isn't engaging with us. She is withdrawing.
That's a great point.
It perfectly captures her inner weariness. Dorothy Parker was known for her brilliant, biting, cynical humor, but she also struggled deeply with depression and melancholy. That unconventional choice to close her eyes shows us a woman who is just profoundly tired of the world. She has shut the performance down.
But Avedon didn't just capture the heavy, silent, depressive moments. He also captured the vibrant, explosive energy of the 60s pop culture revolution. In 1967, he shoots the Beatles in London for Look magazine.
This was right during their experimental Street Peppers era. They're changing music, abandoning their clean-cut boy band image, and Avedon changed how the culture saw them.
He took these stark, direct portraits of the four band members, but then they were transformed into these brightly colored psychedelic posters. We're talking vibrant purples, electric oranges, bright yellows, and reds.
Oh, they're iconic.
They really are. And what's amazing, as the source points out, is how Avedon's simple, direct gaze approach perfectly captured each member's distinct personality within that psychedelic explosion. You have John Lennon's aloof, slightly arrogant, distant stare, Paul McCartney's softer, more open expression, George Harrison looking deeply introverted and spiritual, and Ringo Starr just projecting this natural, grounded ease. It became the definitive visual for the youth culture of the 60s.
He could capture the zeitgeist of a generation just as easily as he could capture a solitary soul. And he continued to push boundaries into the 80s, creating images that blurred the line between fashion, portraiture, and pure myth-making.
It's wild to think the same lens that captured the psychedelic explosion of the Beatles also captured the next image we're going to discuss. In 1981, he shoots a legendary Vogue spread featuring the actress Nastassja Kinski. The setup is wild. She is lying down, completely nude, and draped across her body is a massive, live python. The snake's head is reaching up, curving intimately right toward her ear.
It's an image that stops you dead in your tracks. The symbolism is impossible to miss. It immediately evokes the Adam and Eve narrative in the Garden of Eden, a primal mythological tension. But what is truly staggering is the technical process behind it.
Right, because you can't exactly direct a snake.
Exactly. The source emphasizes the incredible patience this required. Avedon had to wait hours for the python to move naturally, to capture that singular, fluid, deeply theatrical moment where the animal and the human form a perfect, surreal composition.
It's a masterclass in capturing tension. But by the 1980s, Avedon had conquered the worlds of celebrity and high fashion. He was at the absolute peak of his commercial power. So what does a master do when he's done it all?
He walks away.
He walks away from the studio entirely. He leaves the celebrities and the fashion magazines behind for a massive, grueling 5-year project. It was called In the American West.
This is, for many critics and art historians, his magnum opus. For 5 years, he traveled across the western states, dragging his seamless white backdrop into the dirt, the wind, and the glaring sun.
And he didn't photograph celebrities. He photographed the unseen, ordinary people who actually built and sustained the country. Miners, drifters, farmers, waitresses, slaughterhouse workers.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Avedon was doing something incredibly subversive here. For decades, Hollywood, literature, and popular culture had sold the world a very specific, romanticized myth of the American West.
The John Wayne cowboy.
The heroic cowboy riding into the sunset. The rugged individualist, the untamed, glorious frontier. Avedon took a sledgehammer to that myth. He replaced the cinematic cowboy with the harsh, grueling, unglamorous reality of the American dream.
You look at these photos and you see the physical toll that hard labor takes on the human body. And technically, he wasn't using a quick, handheld camera for this.
No, and this is a crucial technical point. He used a massive, cumbersome 8x10 large format view camera. This isn't a camera you snap a quick candid with. You have to set it up on a heavy tripod, hide under a dark clock to focus it, and load individual sheets of film.
Wow, that sounds intense.
It is. Because the film is so large, the resolution is staggering. It captures every single pore, every drop of sweat, every speck of dirt. And because the process is slow, the subject has to stand perfectly still. It brings back that intense, microscopic level of scrutiny and that facial fatigue we saw back in his Navy days.
It forces a profound stillness. One of the most famous and frankly surreal images from this project is the portrait of a beekeeper named Ronald Fisher, taken in Davis, California in 1981.
Oh, that one is incredible.
The visual here is just wild. Fisher is standing bare-chested in front of Avedon's signature white backdrop out in the sun, and his entirely bald head, his face, his neck, and his torso are completely covered in thousands of crawling live bees.
It is an incredibly tense image. The viewer feels immediate anxiety looking at it. The inherent danger of the situation is palpable. And factually, the source notes Fisher was actually stung multiple times during the shoot.
But the contrast is what makes it brilliant. While we, the viewers, are anxious, Fisher is standing there with a totally serene, completely calm, direct gaze into the camera. It's this bizarre, beautiful tension between the chaotic, stinging threat of nature and absolute human stillness.
Beautifully put.
And then you have the photos that are just pure, unflinching social documents, like the portrait of the oil field worker taken in Texas in 1979.
This image forces you to look at the invisible, back-breaking labor that powers the modern economy.
The man in the photo is staring hard right through the lens. His face, his hands, his clothes, they are thoroughly coated in dark, thick oil and grime. The wrinkles in his face look like they've been carved out by exhaustion and the elements.
By using that white backdrop out in the Texas dirt, Avedon removes the oil rig, the machinery, the sprawling landscape. He leaves you alone with the worker. It strips away the industry and makes the human cost of that labor impossible to look away from. It's a profound document of social reality.
So what does this all mean for us today? Richard Avedon dedicated his entire life to this relentless pursuit of the truth behind the face. He worked for legendary publications like Vogue and The New Yorker for decades, and his dedication was so absolute, so tied to his identity as a photographer, that he literally worked until his dying breath. He suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and passed away in 2004 while on assignment, shooting a project in San Antonio, Texas.
He never stopped looking for the person behind the mask. And this raises an important question for all of us living today. We live in an era where literally everyone have a high-definition camera in their pocket at all times. We spend hours endlessly curating our best angles, filtering our skin, and projecting a flawless, highly edited, frictionless version of our lives on social media.
We are all playing the Marilyn Monroe role, performing for our followers, trying to keep the smile perfectly fixed.
Exactly. And Avedon's life's work stands as a stark reminder that true photography, true human connection, isn't about capturing a pretty face or a curated aesthetic. It's about capturing the truth of who we are when the mask slips, when the exhaustion shows, when the vulnerability finally bleeds through.
It makes you wonder about the future of photography itself. We're rapidly entering an age of artificial intelligence where flawless, hyper-realistic portraits of people who don't even exist can be generated by a computer in seconds. The algorithms can create perfect symmetry, perfect lighting, and perfect smiles on command.
It's a very different world.
It is. If a machine can perfectly mimic human beauty, will Avedon's lifelong pursuit of the true, unguarded, flawed moment become a lost art? Or, as the world becomes more synthetic, will those raw, unedited human scars and moments of exhaustion become the only way we can actually prove to each other that we are real? If Richard Avedon were to photograph you and he waited in silence until your practiced camera smile faded and your true self bled through, what story would that final photograph tell the world? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.